I better finish it. That would be embarrassing if I didn't. All right. According to Piaget, a baby is born with all its senses primed to take in new information. The baby organizes all the incoming data in the form of schemes that are added to and changed with new information. Right after birth, the newborn must operate in its world using its senses and its motor skills. This stage Piaget referred to as the sensorimotor stage. The newborn will try to understand the world using its senses, especially its mouth. And if you've ever been around a baby that's younger than 2 years old, as soon as it grabs something, it goes right into the mouth. This stage runs from birth to 2 years. The infant's first interactions with the world are through reflexive behavior. Hunger plus presence of nipple equals the rooting reflex. And there the baby is getting a drink of milk. After about 1 month, the infant will begin developing habits and circular reactions. The habit is a scheme based on a reflex that becomes separated from its stimuli, sucking when a nipple isn't present. A circular reaction is a repetitive action. An infant will begin participating in primary circular reaction. The infant will use its body in a repetitive manner. And that's my grandson again. At 2 months, it says right there. Bald-headed little fellow, look at that. At about 4 to 8 months, a child will begin participating in secondary circular reactions. The infant will go outside itself for stimulation. Between the 8th and the 12th month, the infant will begin coordinating its secondary circular reactions. The infant will begin mixing and matching its exploration of its environment. And there's my grandson again, but he's naked this time. I don't think he cares. He's only about 8 months old there. Tertiary circular reactions develop between the 12th and 18th month. The infant starts exploring the properties of its environment. Internalization of schemes occurs between the 18th and 24th month. The child begins using symbols such as language to communicate. And of course, even at that age, they want to talk on the phone. Between the 4th and 8th month, the baby will develop an understanding that just because someone or something is not there, it isn't gone. This is known as object permanence. At about the 18th month, most toddlers will begin to talk in gesture. Words and gestures are examples of the first stage of the abstract thinking, the use of symbols. Children begin to engage in pretend play, and waving becomes the sign language for goodbye. English is made up of individual sounds that are put together to make words that have meaning. These sounds are called phonemes. There are about 44 in the English language, depending on where you live. And I'm going to show you what the English phonemes look like. Maybe.
The key sounds of English, 44 phonemes and 4 blends. 18 consonant phonemes. B, k, d, f, g, j, o, n, p, s, t, z, w, y, z. 5 consonant digraph phonemes. N, j, ch, sh, th, and th. 16 vowel phonemes. A, e, I, A, A, E, I, O, oo, ow, oi, ah, aw, 5 R-controlled phonemes. R, or, air, ear. 4 blends. Ur, qu, u, x, or gs. And here they all are on one page.
Now, isn't that exciting? Maybe or maybe not. Now you can see what I listen to on YouTube or look at. Goodness, there's no pornography there. Anyway, oops, there we go. When we put phonemes together, if the sounds we put together communicate, they are words or morphemes. Another name for word is morpheme. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning. Carport has 2 morphemes, car and port. Roper has 2 morphemes, rope and meaning somebody who does whatever the noun is. Sequence of early language development. As physical structures mature, children are able to make more and more sounds. Neuronal connections necessary to associate sound and meaning become activated. Social interaction with adults introduces babies to the communicative nature of speech. Sequence of language. First, there is prelinguistic speech. That's cooing, where the baby makes vowel sound. Vowel sounds. That is correct. Cooing is vowel sounds, and babbling is where they add consonant sounds to the vowel sounds. And then linguistic speech, where they will use one word to mean a whole sentence. That's a hollow phrase. And telegraphic speech, where they leave all the connector words out. Let me give you an example of a hollow phrase. If they want to throw the ball, they may say ball, or if they want a cookie, they may say cookie instead of I want a cookie. Telegraphic speech, if they wanted a cookie, they'd say want cookie, not I want the cookie. They'd say want cookie. Telegraphic speech. Or in the case of a ball, they might say play ball or ball play instead of I want to play with the ball. That's telegraphic speech. Children learn language quite rapidly, a process referred to as fast mapping. One reason is because the parent tends to try to teach their child words by labeling objects when they are both looking at the item. This is known as joint attention. Chomsky suggested an inborn language acquisition device, which programs children's brain to analyze the language they hear and to figure out its rules. This is known as nativism. Evidence that environmental influences alone cannot explain the emergence of linguistic expression. A good example of nativism would be if only Dene was spoken in your house, then you probably learned to speak Dene without any interference. But if there were 2 languages being spoken in your house, and of course, when there's a mother who speaks one language and a father that speaks another language, and both of them are trying to teach the child both languages, what will happen is the child will pick up both languages just as readily as if they were only speaking one language. They'll be able to speak both languages, and this is the reason why if there are 2 native speakers in the house of different languages, that the baby or the individual will pick up both languages without any accent. The left hemisphere seems to be a critical portion of the brain for learning language. No other primate can learn language. Language acquisition must take place before the age of 12, or it only takes place with much effort and incompletely. First attempts to communicate at 10 months. After the first birthday, the child will engage in conversation with adults, even though the baby's not making any sense. As the child ages, the language skills improve and the vocabulary grows. Children simplify language. Children over-regularize rules. They apply them rigidly, not knowing that some rules have exceptions. Children understand grammatical relationships they cannot yet express. Children underextend word meanings. Children simplify language. All dry, hit ball. They apply them rigidly, not knowing that some rules have exceptions. I played with toy. I go to store. Children understand grammatical relationships they cannot yet express. I like you. When the world is mine, your death shall be quick and painless. That's little, I can't remember that kid. Children underextend word meanings. Tanya won't let anyone else call their father daddy because that is what she calls her father. Underextend word meanings. Children overextend word meanings. Melissa calls all animals doggy because that is what her mother taught her to call their dog. Reading aloud to your child allows for opportunities for emotional intimacy and parent-child communication. Children who are read to often have better language skills at ages 2, 4, and 5, and better reading comprehension at age 7. According to Erickson, in his 1950 book, early experiences are the key to developing either trust or mistrust. Sensitive, responsive, consistent caregiving leads to trust. Mistrust is developed when the infant's basic needs are not met. Autonomy versus shame and doubt leads to a shift from external to self-control. Negativism is the tendency to shout no just for the sake of resisting authority. This type of behavior hits its peak during the terrible twos. Negativism may hit another peak between 3.5 and 4, but will usually decline before they enter school. Birth to 6 to 8 weeks, evolution has endowed a baby with many behaviors that elicit caregiving from the adult. Crying, smiling, gazing intently into the parent's face, and we saw my grandson doing that to my daughter only days after he was born. The parent responds by holding and cuddling the baby, of course. This creates an interactive system and is the first step in attachment. 6 to 8 weeks to 6 to 8 months, the next stage is the attachment in the making stage. Babies start to recognize the act differently and act differently around familiar and unfamiliar caregivers. They attach themselves to primary caregivers and cling to them when they are in distress or mock distress. 6 to 8 months to 18 months, by the 7th or 8th month, the child has usually singled out one of their caregivers as their favorite. Usually it's their mother. The child will use the mother as a base to explore from. The baby trusts the mother to be there. But of course, that's not what happened in my family. Both my kids were daddy's kids. And it kind of made my wife upset. Of course, she left after 9 months. After my son was born, my second child was born. She left after 9 months. But it may have had something to do, and you really can't blame the kids. It's not because the kids were, because I'm so much friendlier than my wife. That didn't have anything to do with it. What it had to do with was the fact that she always had something else that she wanted to do. She didn't want to take care of the children, and I liked And I like to play with the kids, and so I interacted with them a lot more. Even when there was nobody else home besides her, she would try to put them places so that they wouldn't bother her while she was doing whatever it was she wanted to do. And of course, when I was home, I let them crawl all over me. I played with them. We always had a good time. And after she left, we had to have a good time because there was nobody else there but me. 18 months and older, the ever expanding cognitive and language skills of the child can call for more and more interaction between the child and the parent. The child will and should take the initiative to initiate these interactions. Negotiation often takes place at that stage. There's a strong relationship between a father's close involvement with his baby and the baby's development. The father's involvement in caregiving has increased by 1/3 in a single generation. 1/4 of U.S. fathers take care of their preschool age children while the mother works, and nearly 1/5 are primary caregivers. U.S. fathers tend to play with their children in a more physical style, though this is not common in other countries, just in the United States. Developing attachments, a reciprocal, enduring emotional tie. Secure attachment, the baby greets mom happily when she returns. Okay, so let me tell you what this is all about. Yeah, this is all about a research done by Mary Ainsworth. Mary Ainsworth decided that she knew that some children don't develop a very strong attachment for their mother. So what she did, she set up an experiment, and the experiment was for the mother and child to come into a room, and then the mother would leave, and they would observe the child to see how the baby, or how the child, or the toddler in this case actually, how the toddler handled the mother being gone, and how the toddler reacted when the mother came back. So from this research, they developed 4 different types of attachment, and this is what the results showed. In the secure attachment, the baby greeted the mother happily when she returned. The baby wasn't upset when the mother left. They might acknowledge that the mother was leaving, but they wouldn't be upset because they knew that the mother was coming back. This has to do with Erickson's trust versus mistrust. So when the mother came back, the toddler would greet the mother. In avoidant attachment, they avoid the mom when she returned. This potentially had to do with a mother that was a little distant from the child, who didn't want to spend a lot of time. During the Victorian era, during the late 19th century and early 20th century, parents were taught not to spend too much time with their children. Um, it was suggested that they not show them very much affection. Well, if that was the type of parenting that this parent did, then potentially the child would learn to do things on their own. So in the avoidant attachment, when the mother came back, the child didn't pay any attention to them. In ambivalent or resistant attachment, the child was anxious even before the mother left. They seemed to be overly anxious, as if they were afraid something was going to happen. And when she came back, the child didn't pay any attention to her. So they didn't want her to leave, but once she left, then they didn't pay any attention to her when she came back. And this is known as the ambivalent or resistant attachment style. The last type is known as disorganized, disoriented attachment. They were inconsistent. They had contradictory behavior. A lot of this has to do with how the parents interact in their environment. If, for example, if the mother and father are alcoholics, then the child won't have any clue who's coming in the door. They may look the same as they did before, but when they're drunk, they act one way. When they're not drunk, they act a totally different way. So that would have to do with the ambivalent, resistant attachment because they never knew what they were going to get. What if the mother had suffered from postpartum depression? If she suffered from postpartum depression, she wouldn't pay a lot of attention to the child. She would be depressed all the time. So the child would potentially avoid the mother. So a lot of these attachment styles have to do with how the mother interacts with her environment or the whichever caregiver we're talking about. Erickson and other theorists feel that the infant-parent relationship lays the foundation for all later social relationships. Therefore, a child who experiences a secure relationship with their parents will be able to maintain this pattern of attachment throughout their lives. Insecure attachments may lead to other problems for the child due to problems in parent-child relationships, maltreatment, and parental mental illness. Of course, we just talked about that. That if the parent is mistreating the child, or if the parent suffers from a mental illness, their interaction with the child will change the way that the child reacts to them. Researchers have determined that secure attachment is most likely to occur when parents are responsive and sensitive. Babies who have difficult temperaments are less likely to develop secure attachment. Unfortunately, these difficult children do not elicit positive treatment from their parents. Research shows that these mothers can be trained to give their children the type of treatment that they need. What if you had a mother who was on crystal meth? And of course, to somebody that uses meth, the most important thing right now is my next fix. It's not your children. And so a lot of times the children will be neglected. They'll be neglected not only physically, but also they'll be neglected emotionally. So really the environment is really important as far as how the child develops an attachment for their caregivers. It was really kind of interesting. My first wife left, and then she came back, and then she left again, then she came back, then she found another boyfriend. You know, it was one of those kind of off again, on again situations. The kids got so used to her not being there that, of course, they knew who she was. It's not like they didn't know who she was. When she would come back, she would say, "Well, come and give mommy a kiss," and they would come over. And they kind of, they didn't really know what to do because uh, she wasn't around very much, and it was almost like a stranger would come over. And sometimes she would demand affection from the children um, when she didn't show them any affection. It was really kind of odd. They saw through her fairly quickly um, that it was all fairly superficial. Strangely enough, both of them developed abandonment issues later on in life. I guess that's not so strange since they were both abandoned at an early age by their mother. Despite the fact that I was always around, I was always taking care of them, um, they still developed the abandonment issues because they both had lived part of their infancy with her, with a mother, and of course, society society's kind of interesting. Society doesn't say you need a caregiver. Society says you need a mother. So it was really kind of a curious situation. They always felt that deficit, the fact that society was trying to tell them that they needed this person, but they didn't want that person because that person didn't really treat them very well. Um, and so they felt that it was a deficit because that's what the culture was telling them. Really kind of fascinating. Both of them are fine now. My son, well, I don't know about that. My my son has had several girlfriends, but he's been engaged to this lady for about 7 years now. Not sure why they don't get married. He's a mathematician, so and wherever they go, they keep moving around. Wherever they go, he tries to figure out whether it's better for them to stay officially unattached or to get married. And so far, uh, poor Stacy has always the necessity for marriage financially was never there. Now they're both making a lot more money, so maybe they'll go ahead and get married. I hope they invite me to the wedding. I moved, I moved him in March. Was it in March? No, it was in October. In October, I moved him from. I helped them move from North Carolina to Washington D.C. My son works in Washington D.C. and my son's fiance works at Annapolis. So they both have pretty stable jobs. We'll see what happens. Maybe they'll get married, maybe they won't. Like I said, I hope they invite us. Newborns are able to demonstrate their unhappiness by crying, flailing their arms, and stiffening their bodies. When babies need something, they cry. When they are feeling sociable, they smile or laugh. When their emotions are responded to, they react in a similar manner when the emotion occurs again. I've told you before that my grandson was the happiest baby I've ever been around. Usually babies cry. He never did. If he needed his diaper changed, he just kind of looked at you and you figured it out. So he was. I got to be with him for his first couple months. He was living in at the time we were here in Iowa, and my daughter was living in Florida. So everything worked out. I was able to help her with the baby the first 2 months. I worked in NICU. I worked in uh, I worked with babies a lot. I had a job at a children's hospital for a while in Omaha. Smiling occurs spontaneously soon after birth, but it is usually not tied to anything specific. Spontaneous smiling slowly decreases over the first 3 months. Responsive smiling begins the second week to stimulation, usually feeding. By the third week, the infant smiles in response to voices and faces. Social smiling begins at about 1 month. Laughing begins in the fourth month by stimulation. When I worked in NICU, it was really kind of interesting because I would go in to draw blood from the kids, and I'd start talking to the nurses or I'd talk to the babies. And when I was in there, the babies' heart rates would go down. Um, so I evidently my voice was soothing to a baby. Um, it's not very soothing to you guys, I imagine. Every time you hear it, you start cringing. But the babies in the neonatal intensive care unit um, with heart monitors on, they tended to go down. We had this one baby that was really fragile, and there were two of us that could talk the baby into lowering its heart rate. There was a nurse, and she didn't especially have a very soothing voice. I'm not exactly sure what it was about her that the baby responded to, but the other person was me. And from time to time, if I was working, they'd call me down to the nursery just to talk to the baby or just to talk so that the baby's blood pressure would sometimes they redline, and he would, if he started to redline, they'd call me down and I'd talk to him. Researchers have discovered that babies can show joy, sadness, interest, and fear at birth. Later, they show anger, surprise, and disgust, depending on the amount of emotional stimulation and the emotional display their caregivers have shown them. Body movement is also a good way of reading a baby's emotion. Turning the body away turning the gaze away, of course, has to do with them trying to tell you to stop it. Babies rarely react negatively to strangers before 6 months of age. Many children react more negatively to strangers around their eighth or ninth month, though it gradually decreases to their first year. Babies are less likely to act negatively if mothers speak positively of the individual and they approach the baby slowly and playfully. I had, I was working with a lady and she hated men, hated men. She was married, but she hated men, and it was really kind of interesting. She brought the baby in, and she didn't want the baby to act positively toward any man. So she would get this really growl, this growl in her voice whenever. And this is Bruce, that kind of a situation. That's Charlie. And of course, the baby would start crying almost right away as soon as she growled at him. But anytime a female came over, she would say, "Oh, here's Aunt Susie. Here's Auntie Lily." That kind of stuff. And of course, the baby would react positively to the females and not to the males. While most children worldwide express the same basic and complex emotions, in some cultures, emotional expression is encouraged, and in others, it isn't. Research comparing American children with Chinese children showed that at 11 months, American children cried and smiled more than 11-month-old Chinese children who were taught not to express their emotions. The Chinese are taught not to express their emotions. Americans, of course, are. When American children were given awards where they stand out, they feel proud in their personal achievement. In China, the same situation would elicit embarrassment and shame. This situation would be celebrated by honoring the entire class or even the entire school instead of the individual. If someone takes something from an American child, they are likely to show anger. In Buddhist countries, a child rarely shows anger for any reason at all. The Buddhist countries are India, parts of China. Japan is kind of a Buddhist country. It's a Shinto. Shinto is a Buddhist religion, I guess. So it's the southern portion of Asia. One of the basic means of surviving in a social world is to take cues for your behavior from others. Children begin doing this at birth, and we all continue it when we are in unfamiliar or ambiguous situations. This is known as social referencing, and this is something that I did when I was living at Saley. If I went someplace, I never knew what I was supposed to be doing, so I would kind of attach myself to somebody who is Dene, and I would social reference. I would do what they did. I wouldn't try to act different than they did because I didn't want to offend anybody. This may be one reason why children often mimic their parents' phobias. As children get older, they begin regulating their own emotion. A child is more likely to try to deal with their own fear as they get older than seek assistance. Children will use mental strategies to manage emotions, talking to themselves in order to control unwanted feelings. Not all children are able to regulate their emotions, and the ones who struggle tend to have problems interacting with others. Through the first year, children have been playing with their own toys. They will allow older people to play with them, but they don't really play well with their peers. About age 1, the child begins to be able to play alongside a peer who is playing with a similar toy or in a similar manner. The children will monitor each other's play, but they won't play with each other. This is known as parallel play. As the children approach their second birthday, they will begin playing together in a more organized fashion. In this play, they will accept specialized roles and play will follow specific themes. This type of play is referred to as cooperative play. Between the 15th and 18th month mark, the children will begin engaging in similar activities and talk and smile with one another while this takes place. This is known as simple social play. As children become older, their cooperative play becomes more and more intricate. Children will start using more imaginary themes in their play and will incorporate items that they that may take on some quite imaginary characteristics. This is referred to as symbolic play. And that's what they're doing here. She's a nurse, and she's well, you can see which one's a nurse, and the other one, the other individual that's standing is the mother. It looks like, and the little girl, of course, is cutting a tomato. I'm thinking she's got a knife. Be careful. Researchers have discovered that symbolic play follows cultural precepts. American children tend to engage in more adventure and fantasy play, while Korean children play following more traditional values. Family themes with a harmony more important than conflict. And that is the end of the chapter. There we go. Oh,